humans have survived over 5,000 years by effectively warding off enemies, threats. We have a really doozy of one now. It's climate change. While most of the world is leaning in, America has opted out with three objections. People don't care, it's going to cost too much, and what about all those other countries? Well, this reminds me of when we were trying to figure out how to price Sonicare, when the competition was free toothbrushes handed out by the dentists. Until we shifted from thinking about cost to thinking about value, we had trouble getting the answer. But once we did $150 for this toothbrush, and then we had the fun opportunity to explain the value. So I wonder with carbon why it is that we only talk about cost, we never talk about value. Well, let's explore these three issues, including the value perspective. People really do care about carbon. It took a while for it to soak in, but now 3/4 of Americans want to regulate carbon dioxide as a pollutant, and almost as many of them would prioritize the environment over the economy. And that's across all the states with a strong majority. This population is raring to go. But it raises another question. Why is it we're always talking about, are you for this, are you for that, the environment or the economy? Why can't we have both? Because carbon is part of a vast waste stream that wastes a whole bunch of money, and if we can find the common cause and pinch it off, we can save money as well as reduce carbon. That became such a compelling concept that we formed the Low Carbon Prosperity Institute. As an entrepreneur, I've learned that one of the best things to do is to start with a big, hairy, audacious goal. The Deep Decarbonization Project gives us a really good goal, 80% reduction by the year 2050. That's about 5% per year, with an estimated cost of about 1% of our gross domestic product. Now, to keep that in perspective, that's about as much as we spend drinking alcoholic beverages. So we can drink, we can save life on the planet. What do you say? I think we should be able to afford that. One of the reasons that we can is that waste is a significant component of this carbon world. In Washington State, the amount of money that's wasted in energy efficiency could pay for our entire school system. That's because the amount of energy we put into our cars is primarily wasted. About 80% of it is wasted. By comparison, electric vehicles are 4 times as efficient and are soon likely to overcome regular cars in terms of economics. When we plug them into clean power sources, presto, we get virtually carbon-free performance. That's win-win. And while we're talking about transportation, let's also consider congestion, because congestion wastes a lot of time and money. These trucks are traveling at remarkably close spacing. That's because they are connected electronically. That allows them to get much better fuel mileage, and it also improves the ability to utilize the roadway by as much as 4-to-1. The Chinese are working on a system using this kind of technology to revolutionize mass transit. Imagine a fleet of electric buses that travel to where people want to be picked up and takes them to a place where these buses connect to drive in this unison manner rather than having to go to the station in order to use mass transit. Another low-carbon prosperity principle is to get the best out of our existing resources. Forestry and agriculture already absorb about a third of the emissions that we put up into the atmosphere. And that's because trees suck carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere during their growth phase, and then we can turn them into wood, put them into buildings for long-term storage. There's a new technology of wood products called cross-laminated timbers, or CLT for short, that gives us higher performance products such as gluliams and plywood, so that we can construct 12-story tall buildings out of CLT. And the magic about this is that the CLT buildings can store 4 times as much carbon as conventional, as well as being very attractive. Here's a project that Forterra is doing to demonstrate the economics, building a low-income housing project in Seattle. Gotta love it. What a great use of wood. Well, how about all the wood that's left over in the forest after we have this use of wood that is also managed in a sustainable manner? Because organic products like wood and food rot decay and release carbon dioxide. We can capture those materials and change their form in order to store that carbon. Here's an example. This little vial can store carbon for 1,000 years. And while we're doing that, this biochar can be used as a soil amendment, where it decreases the amount of water that's required in irrigation, decreases the fertilizer. That makes the farmer happy. Decreases fertilizer runoff. That makes the salmon happy. And that makes the orcas happy because they eat the salmon. That's a lot of happiness out of one bottle. Now, if food waste were its own country, it would be right behind the US in terms of carbon emissions. Yes, there's a technology for that too. Let's feed the food that we don't eat to bacteria that are happy to eat it, and then we extract power and water from that broth using a biodigester. This equipment is so efficient that it'll pay for itself in just a few years, and then it's pure profit thereafter. Now, these are examples of technologies that already exist, many of which are being used in rural applications, thereby improving rural economies and helping to heal the urban-rural divide. And these are technologies that already exist. Imagine how much better we're going to be 10 years from now, and how much better we'll be past that if America gets into the game. And it's likely that these kinds of technologies will give us half or more of that 80% reduction. Now, how about all those other countries? Here's a list of the 10 greatest emitters, rank ordered in terms of their climate change performance. The very best, India. The very worst, the United States. In the middle, China, but it's the most improved player. China is just rocking it. They are number 1 in solar production and solar use. They're installing more EVs on their roads than the rest of the world combined. They are building 60 nuclear power plants. Nuclear does not emit carbon, and it's also free from dependence upon weather patterns, unlike solar and hydro. China is also installing a cap-and-trade system. Cap-and-trade is a really good choice for managing carbon because it offers three important features. First is it establishes a declining cap over time, so we know that we're going to get the results that we want. Secondly, it supplies a market for both emitters and solution suppliers so that the cost of achieving this cap is minimized. And the third is it supplies funding for work that's appropriate for governments to do. And when I say appropriate, it means going through a process of deciding what the government should do versus what the rest of us should do. So China is definitely getting into the game, as is business. Business is realizing that they're better off being at the policy table than to be on the policy table. Oil companies are getting involved. BP, for example, is working with the environmental organizations. It's helpful that businesses are actually being encouraged by about $35 trillion worth of investment power that says, we want you to do this. So we have CEOs of major corporations lobbying Congress to install carbon pricing. And we have the auto industry asking the president not to roll back pollution standards because they're better off having America in the market of clean cars, which is already worldwide. It's even bigger with America participating. The youth of America and the world also gets it. Here's Greta, age 16, addressing the European Union Parliament. Go, Greta. Greta and the youth climate movement have millions of followers. And they've realized that unless they exercise their right to vote, they have no right to complain about the bad things that their elders are leaving them with. In the US, children are suing the United States of America for the right to a climate that can sustain human life and getting favorable rulings. I really like this quote. It really struck me. We need a social tipping point that flips our thinking before we reach a tipping point in the climate system. Why are we having trouble doing that? It's not technology. It's not economics. It's a moral issue. What do you value? What do we value? And how do we socialize our values into resolved, committed action? America needs to have a conversation with all voices represented, rich and poor, urban and rural, left and right, old and young, white and people of color. We need to come to a decision and do it rapidly. This tipping point is exactly what happened with Sonicare. People talked about Sonicare and talked about it and how valuable it was, and it reached a point of unstoppable momentum, critical mass, a tipping point, and it became the fastest growing private company in America. So my hope for you, for your hope, is for it to grow and for you to be emboldened to participate in the conversation. Because after all, as we transform our economy, we also have the opportunity to transform ourselves, our society, and our nation. Thank you.